Okay, so I'm back, and this is my first interview since being on at least a 2 year hiatus from Do It for a Living. But I myself, Reed Lundy, am doing this podcast, and I'm super stoked today because I have a really cool technical guest who's going to demystify CAN controls. And it's just going to be a really cool thing because we're going to get to find out about some technical stuff and then also some business stuff as well and hear his life story. So without further ado, it's Vadim Belogorodsky, and he is the owner of CANtrolls. Vadim, how's it going, man?
Hey Reed, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. I've actually been trying to, I suggested getting you on before we even knew each other. Back, I don't know, about a year ago, something like that. So I'm stoked to have you here. I'm going to grill you. It's going to be terrible, so be scared, and we'll go
I
from
can't
there.
wait.
So I like to jump right into it. I think I say that at the beginning of every episode, but tell us about yourself and your business. Like, how did you get started, and what's your background? And like, take us all the way back to when you were a kid. So like, how does it go?
All right, so it does start, I guess, when I was a kid. Both my parents were techie. My dad was a computer programmer, and my mom was a software tester. This was before, all the automated stuff. So they would come home and talk about work stuff. Um, I remember, trying to pick up programming when I was 9, but either I wasn't mature enough or old enough to understand what was happening. I kind of dropped it.
Oh,
And
okay.
at this, yep. At the same time, I was also like a pretty pudgy kid, so my parents signed me up for swim practice, and those two things follow me through life. Um, like when I mean, from 9 to 13, nothing really significant happened, but 13 is kind of where I became myself more with the swimming becoming serious, and I think that's where I learned a lot of the things that I've carried through, like the personal values. Um, but at the same time, when swimming got serious, that's when I picked up programming again. Um, and
And were your parents encouraging you to do this thing, or are they just kind of like laissez-faire? Like, what's going on?
so my dad had a whole bunch of books for learning how to program just from when he was learning 20 years before me. So these were
Uh-huh.
like, 1980s books, right when, computers were even starting. Um, And I'd get home from swim practice and be so tired that I wouldn't play video games or go outside. I would just read programming books. Like that was
Le-
something I could do, right?
Legit.
So I learned to program and I would make little, calculators for this, temperature converters, and, slowly building skills up.
Just for
I
fun.
don't, for
Like just
fun, yeah.
just as something that interested you. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's no reason behind it. I didn't think there was any business
So
or anything else.
let me ask you this: like, did you start other things and like kind of put them down? Because you said you started this and kind of put it down, but then it seems like it just clicked for you. So were there other things along the way that you're like, maybe tried it and then that doesn't really interest me, or that I tried that doesn't really interest me, and then you just kind of ended up doing programming and that just clicked pretty much from day one, like when you were 13 at least.
Yes and no. At the same time, I was also playing video games a lot. And so learning to program, you can it helped to like learn to program and then see what was happening in the games to like see if I could predict the next move almost.
Okay.
So like they weren't related. I was playing video games way before then, but like now that I knew how programming worked, it was the games were, a different level of interest to me. They weren't just entertainment, they were more like a study.
Yeah.
And that's really it. So I was like, I was tired from swimming and I was just, you know, doing something that didn't require physical exertion, just mental at that
Yeah.
point.
And so at that point, is your dad into this, like you doing this path for you? Is he encouraging you to do that?
So they weren't encouraging it, but they weren't stopping me. So I would build, little programs. Like I remember my first real one was blackjack. And I like Googled all the all the calculations and shuffling cards and made sure it was a legitimate blackjack game. I lost every single time. Um, and I remember I had a problem, so I went to my dad and I'm like, how do I fix this? It was the first time where I understood what 20 years of experience versus me, teaching myself was. Because
Uh-huh.
he looked at it and he's like, oh yeah, I've done this before, and with 3 lines of code fixed 3 pages of text.
Uh-huh.
So that's when I knew that was really the first time I realized that coding is not a passive thing. You have to think about it,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. But
So
that's
then
really where,
how do you go from being a teenager to where you are now? So,
so
you're 13, you're getting started, you're doing this, you're going through high school, you go to college, like,
yep.
get us there.
Yep. So swimming all the way up until, 14. Yeah. So at 14, I also started working with my dad, and that's kind of where I built up the professionalism and, kind of, I don't want to be doing this, but this is what puts money in my pocket so I can do other things. That's kind of where I learned to be, an adult.
How are
Um,
you were working with your dad at his job or?
yeah. So he was doing the programming thing. My brother and I were doing data entry. So
Okay.
it wasn't directly for him, but it was at the same building.
Okay.
Um,
Gotcha.
but that's where I learned to work, right? So programming, swimming, work all kind of happened pretty early for me. At 17, started driving, and my swim coach at the time, his dad owned a drag racing shop. They built motors, they built cars, strictly drag racing.
This is your swim coach?
Correct.
Okay.
So I was a swimmer from 9 till I was 22, graduated college, and I basically had the same coach throughout the years. So, like a mentor, you grow close together.
Sure.
And when I started driving, he's like, "Come drag racing with me. Expressed interest in cars. Come see what it's like." And I remember him letting me back out his race car out of the trailer, and that was the coolest thing to me, which I now know is an annoying thing to do, but I was all gung ho for it.
Yeah, that's the best.
Um, right? So I came in my 2004 Nissan Altima, and we went bracket racing, right? So it
Run-
was
Running 17s.
Oh, well, you guessed it. 16.92 consistently.
There you go.
And I was up against, the 30-foot dragsters that are going 4 or 5 seconds. There were some people in the eights, some people in the tens.
You're the asshole that shows up in a Nissan Altima.
Yeah, right? And um, I remember I got up to basically, it was the round before I made money. So I think it was fourth out of, the 60 cars that entered. This was
Yeah.
at Atco Raceway in New Jersey.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I got fourth place by running 16.92 every single time. The car that beat me was a Chevy Lumina from 1990, right? And I remember the funniest part was the last race or before the Lumina beat me. There was a dragster I was up against. I was a 6 second car, and he had to wait 11 seconds before he ran. I had an 11-second head start because that's how bracket racing works.
Yeah, yeah.
And he caught me, and luckily, because it was a little cooler out at night, I ran 16.91, and my trap time was always 16.9.
But he
So I
didn't
ran,
break. He didn't break out. You actually beat him heads up, or you beat him to the end.
yeah, because I ran the 100th quicker because of the colder weather.
So is that how
Right,
you got into cars? Your family's not into cars. Your dad isn't a car guy, right?
Nope,
So
nope.
because I feel like you're a real car guy. I feel like you're obsessed. We'll get into this later maybe, but you left a job in California to go do your thing again. So
Yeah,
and every time we talk, it's I can tell that you're really interested in it. So I'm super curious.
yep.
You're like
This
me in the
is,
fact that your family isn't car people necessarily.
yep. So no one in my family, I mean, I had toy cars growing up, but every boy does. This Nissan Altima at bracket racing was the moment that I said cars are it. That is the coolest thing in the world. And then I remember after all the bracket racing, this is a second memory from that same night. there was someone in a Mazda RX-3, like one of those older ones,
Mm-hmm.
with a massive turbo 20B setup. And he was getting his license, like his 6-second certification. So
Yeah.
he had to do like 3 consecutive passes or whatever it was. And I remember just standing behind the car and feeling the whole ground shake when he launched.
Right.
So I was like, all right, how do we make the Nissan Altima do that? Like that was
Right.
the only thing going through my head on the drive home.
Yep. Yep.
And that's where it all started. So getting to back to the storyline here, on the drive home was thinking about that. I was like, man, I need a car because this Altima is my dad's daily driver. I knew like he would not let me have it. So because I was working from 14 to whatever 18 in the summers, I started looking for a car, and I really, really wanted a 350Z. And this is like right when they came out, or a few years after they did.
Uh-huh.
So they weren't as expensive as they were new, but they were still pretty expensive. And I couldn't afford one. I was pretty annoyed about that. So I ended up getting a 300ZX, a Z32.
Oh, okay. At least it was a Z32. I was going to ask you if
Yeah,
it was a Z31. Okay.
nope. But it was the worst one you could buy. It was a non-turbo 2+2 auto. That was the only
Ugh.
thing I could afford. So I did make sure to buy a chassis that was cheap enough to swap a twin turbo manual engine in.
Of
But
course. So how
so
long from when you had it to when you started tearing it apart? Like long time?
9 months.
Okay.
I had lifter problems. The transmission was slipping. It was just awful. Um, I knew nothing about cars at that point, right? I went drag racing once. My swim coach came to look at the car with me, and he's like, it drives. You know, for that amount of money, you better buy it. Um, yeah, like I remember the first question I asked him, I was like, hey, can we shim the throttle bodies? I heard that was like the way to make more power. He's like, no, we're not doing that.
He's like rolling his eyes. He's like,
Yeah, because
yeah.
he knows, he knows the real stuff. And that's kind of the funny part. But anyway, uh, basically, I did the swap 9 months after I bought it, and it would not run for a single week without something breaking. It was just, swap gone wrong. Spent all this money, still had not anything I could drive. Um,
That sounds about right.
so me being not handy at all, it went from shop to shop to shop, basically my bank account rolling out. And it ended up at a shop called One Motion in Pennsylvania. And they're significant for a few reasons. One, he's a listener to the show, and I hope I surprise him by if he hears this.
Shout
Uh,
out.
Shout out, Mike at One Motion. But two, he had the car for like 3 days, and I'm telling you, it was like brand new. Man, it sounded great. It was boosting. Like he fixed everything. And I was a pretty like avid forum goer, and people are like, oh, you can't do anything without pulling the engine or the intake manifold, this and that. And I literally watched him, rebuild the car with, not touching anything. It was amazing.
So Mike's the
Um,
man.
Mike's the man, and I kept on coming back to him. So this was basically when I was getting into college. I knew I wanted to do the engineering thing, but I couldn't decide between mechanical and electrical. Knowing the programming background I had, I leaned toward electrical. Um,
And
Nothing
where'd
really
you go to
happened.
college?
It was a small school in Philadelphia called Widener University.
Okay.
I basically chose it because it had a good engineering program and I could swim there for the team.
Uh,
Um, but you go through school. I had co-ops for the engineering program, and
what's
they're
a co-op?
so in our engineering program we had a co-op. Um, it's where you basically worked for a company while you were in still school and got paid a decent wage.
Hmm,
So more than a minimum wage job, but like not a real engineer. So it'd get you work experience while you're in school.
gotcha. So they had a
So
deal with the university or whatever.
yeah, so these companies would know they're getting kids, and I don't know what the financial deals were, but we did get paid pretty good from the company. So we were real employees.
Cool.
Um, my first co-op was a medical device manufacturer, where I learned all of the ins and outs of Chinese manufacturing. I was a
Because
quality engineer.
so you guys would design or you were doing quality on the manufactured goods coming from overseas?
Correct. So we would spec parts in America. They would build them in China or Taiwan, I forget which, and then send, a container over. And we had to test, a certain amount. And if an amount of those tested failed, then we had to test the full batch of, 4,000 devices. That's basically what I was doing. I was opening boxes, testing, writing out documentation, and then closing the boxes again. Pretty good, insight into what engineering was, but I knew that it was, only a co-op job. But that was my first one, and that's where I got like a real taste of engineering. The funny part about it is it was about an hour and a half away from Mike's shop, and I'd still go every night and like hold a flashlight for him because he would work late.
Yeah.
So that's where my car knowledge came from. Almost every day, I would drive to the shop, we'd get dinner together, and then we'd work until 10 or 11 p.m. And like all those memes where like, the kids getting yelled at for holding the flashlight wrong. I went through every iteration of that. Not in my eyes, on the ratchet. Come on, man.
So you were just super stoked to be around it. Like at this point, you're still totally enamored with the whole car lifestyle, and you just can't get enough of it. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it was a learning opportunity. It was free,
Okay.
right? I didn't have to pay for this. Mike didn't charge me to hold a flashlight, which was nice.
Sure.
I didn't ask for money, so that was nice on, my end. And I just got to, observe, how cars were built, right? Because you see stuff like Fast and the Furious where the cars go into a shop, 10 people attack it, and then, a super cool car comes out. And that's really not how it is.
Not
Right.
even a little bit.
You know better than most. So I got to see it firsthand why a project takes long, what is hard on the car, what's easy, right? So like pulling an engine out is pretty easy, but like routing a fueling system from trunk to manifold is difficult because you have to miss the exhaust and all that kind of stuff.
So what I'm taking away from this whole thing is that you have this like opportunity for like real practical knowledge where you're getting hands-on both at the co-op and with Mike's shop, and then you're also learning kind of at school. So where I feel like the discrepancy in so many people is they're either like a hands-on guy or they're a book learning guy. And I think the thing that makes you successful in your job is kind of the marriage of those two things. You know what I mean?
I do.
A lot of
I was
people
in-
don't have those two things. Like
Yeah.
just being around it, like a practical application for your studies.
Yeah, it's almost useless to go to school if you can't practice the skills that you're learning.
Right.
Like reading it in a book doesn't justify it at all.
Yeah.
But I'm no good with my hands. I'll tell you that. I'll be the first person to tell you that. Like with tools, you don't want me around your car unless it's a laptop. But that experience, I saw the ups and downs, right? So I saw customers or cars getting delivered to customers, and I saw, broken bolts at midnight and, cursing because you have to
Right.
get the, all that stuff.
And you're not
Anyway.
getting paid for it. Right.
Yeah, right?
So
So
you just
it
lose.
was, yeah, like I remember my parents' question, like, why are you doing this? You have to wake up, you get 4 hours of sleep because you're up there till midnight. You have an hour commute to your job. You're there for 9 hours. Like, why are you doing this? And I honestly had no response. I was like, I don't know.
I don't know.
Like, what else would I be doing? Sitting at home?
Yeah.
But all of that kind of worked its way in again. So there was 2 co-ops with my school. The first one was the medical one, and I was driving to Mike's shop. The second one was where, the whole CANtrolls thing started. The second co-op was with a company that manufactured drilling rigs for the water and oil industry. And these were, the big oil rigs that you see on TV and all that. And they basically wanted someone who had a little bit of mechanical knowledge, but really knew more programming. And programming was pretty weak at the college level, so I was one of the only few people qualified because I knew how to program when I taught myself.
Uh-huh.
So I really learned, like, go ahead.
That's when you got like dove into CAN then? Like you weren't doing any CAN work before the drill rigs.
No, not at all. I didn't even know it existed. So the three things I learned at this job was that like normal control theory, right? Like how things should move and, system integration. The second thing was CAN. I didn't even know, and then someone's mentioned like, oh yeah, cars use this, and that was like the last thing they ever said about it. Yeah. And my boss at the time, he, I'll talk about him later, but this is where I met my partner, and he was my boss at the time. Um, so anyway, we were doing these things with the drill rigs, all this CAN bus. The drill rigs were, you set them up on an acre of land, so they were huge. They were made of like 5 parts, all interconnected using CAN, and each part had its own ECU with 4 CAN networks. So at the end of the day, we were managing like 15 to 20 CAN networks on a single rig with 100 sensors and motors and all this stuff.
Hmm.
And the documentation for our own systems was awful. The people who did it, it was parts from various vendors, and it was like a scavenger hunt. Um, and one day I told my boss, I was like, look, it's a lot easier if I just sit down for a day and reverse engineer it than, wait on the phone for the real engineers to tell me what's going on. And he's like, all right, try your hand at it. Here's the tool you need, and here's a laptop so you can see CAN messages. And, it worked. I was like, this is a pressure, this is a temperature, this is a joystick. I reverse engineered the drill rig. That was kind of my first project.
I mean, it feels to me like this just clicked for you. I mean, it feels to me like you looked at it, you sat down, you figured like I could figure this out, and you did.
I did. I mean, it wasn't quick. So, it took me a matter of three
Yeah,
to
like
4 days to get situated and understand the concept. But once you do that, it's just filling in the blanks.
huh.
So, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, there's only like 3 or 4 things that a car or a drill rig has. It has temperature sensors, it has pressure sensors, it has switches and buttons, and it has, a display, so gauges. Once you break it down into that, you're like, okay, which one of the 4 is this, right? And you can press buttons and see what happens. We had a sensor simulator, so I could unplug a sensor and see, what's happening on the CAN. So let's put it this way. I devised a way to reverse engineer it to help myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then, was your first introduction to vehicle CAN buses with Mike? Like, did you start kind of planting seeds in Mike's head about what could happen, or how do you cross over from drill rigs back into cars and still at this point like CANtrolls isn't even a thing,
Mm-mm.
so
So I went up to my boss, and I remember looking on the internet like CAN bus because I needed help, right? So where do you go when you need help? The internet. And the
hmm
only thing that would come up when you searched CAN bus was cars. Like, does my car have CAN bus? Is this gonna screw me over? So I went to my boss and I was like, do cars have CAN? He's like, I don't know, let's go check. And we went out to the parking lot with the same tools and we plugged into his car, which I think was a Subaru. And sure enough, we saw CAN messages, right? So that was the first crossover.
Mm.
So being excited that day, I took the tools and the cables home with me. And I went to Mike and I was like, Mike, look, CAN. You can move the steering wheel and like stuff comes up. And he kind of was like cool, right? And just muttered like cool, and then continued working.
Yeah.
Um, but he's the kind of person that goes home and then like researches it, and then like the next day will like lecture you on CAN. So that's really the buildup of everything. To continue how CANtrolls became a thing, uh, kept on doing the drill rig thing. I graduated school and that was my first full-time job. Um, and Mike was buying wiring harnesses from a company called Wiring Specialties. They make engine swap stuff. Most drifter people know it. I don't know if your audience will. Um, with with the wiring specialties thing, Mike knew that they were looking for a solution to a 350Z product, but he didn't know anything more than that. So he emailed them on Facebook or, messaged them on Facebook.
Uh-huh.
And Yuri called me. He gave my phone number to Yuri. Yuri
So
is the owner of Wiring Specialties.
okay.
He called me and said, "Look, this guy's been buying our products. He says you know your stuff. I'm telling you up front that I've already paid 3 people to give me this information, and you're the fourth. I won't give you any money until you can prove that you've done it." Right? So he's already tried finding something.
Which I feel like is the perfect thing to say to you, because you're going to look at it like, oh yeah, check this out.
Well,
Like
that's exactly what I said.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I was like, all right, so what do you want? He's like, 350Z. Show me that can and you can do stuff. So the hardest part was finding a car, and I got extremely lucky that my cousin owned a 350Z. So literally with my own money, I bought the CAN tools that we had at work so that I had my own set and there's no conflict of interest. And borrowed my cousin's car for the weekend. And within the weekend, I had that chassis fully reverse engineered. And, I bought a 350Z, basically an instrument cluster and dashboard with the full wire harness, the full thing, set it up in my parents' basement, and, made the gauges move while recording a video and sent it to Yuri. And he called me. Yeah.
I love it.
So he calls me and goes like, "What is this witchcraft? Like, did you actually do it, or tell me more?" We go back and forth a few times, and he
Hang on,
visited.
this all happened in a weekend? How did you get a hold of a harness this is like the next week?
Yeah. So like I got the car, I
weeks.
reverse engineered the car, knew that it was possible.
Okay.
Went online, bought a harness, waited that for it to come in through shipping, set that up. I had to write software to, play back the CAN messages and, the beginnings of.
What is this witchcraft?
Yeah. And so, I probably borrowed the car in April, and by June, Yuri and I were meeting to do something or to talk about it seriously. So it was probably a 2-month gap.
Okay.
But we were talking, pretty regularly about this. He was excited.
See, but here's where I want to break it out real quick, because I think that everybody thinks they can do a thing. And in this situation, you went out, spent your own money, bought these tools, and proved it. Instead of, like, I think the typical response would be like, oh, I could do that. I don't need to show him that I can do it. I just know that I can, But like, you created literally an entire career for yourself by being like, I'm going to do that, and I'll show this guy I'm going to do that. So like, he didn't ask you to reverse engineer the entire car, get a harness, and prove it. Like, he asked you like, hey, prove it, which you could have done with a significant amount of less effort. So I feel like what I'm trying to say is you blew his fucking mind by going above and beyond, and now, things start moving for you.
I would very much like to think that. To me, it was, how else do you do it?
Right.
Like, it was a normal, weekend of work.
But that's how you roll.
That is how I am. Me and you have known each other for a bit now. To me, it was just normal. This is what the customer or, person expected. I will fulfill their wishes, right?
Yeah.
So
hang on, I want to interrupt before we just go on this stream of consciousness. Like,
yeah.
So you're doing all this stuff. We've talked about a lot of different things, but like, why not just go work for somebody else? Like, at this point, you're still, pretty young. Well, like you could make, I don't know how much money you're making in this wiring specialties kind of introductory thing, but you've graduated high school now. Isn't there pressure from your parents to, hey, go get some? Because I mean, you can get a starting job. You can get a starting EE job in the 70s.
So I was working for the drill rig place full time throughout this thing.
Okay.
So I was working at the drill rig place for 9 to 5 during the day, and at night and weekends I was fully focused on reverse engineering the car and proving this thing. It was just something interesting for me to do in my time off.
Right.
I should have mentioned that, but yeah, I had a full-time job at this point.
Okay.
Um, so that
So,
was it. Yeah.
well, just back to the wiring specialties thing. So now you and Yuri are meeting, trying to figure out kind of, well, what's possible.
Yep. So he knew of CAN bus but didn't know its capabilities. And I come in from a system that's already, or with the drill rigs, it was already fully done, so there's no questions about it. So the next step in the process, now that like kind of the software was done, was the hardware. And that was kind of where I struggled. Uh, as much as the electrical engineering program I went through at school, they didn't really teach you how to make hardware from scratch. So I was scouring the internet, how to design a PCB, what programs, how do you make a product. I remember Googling how to make a electronics device. Like it's the most vague Google search ever, but
Yeah, like a
right?
legit unanswerable question.
Yeah, but like that was the question staring me at the face.
Yeah.
But I did. I mean, I struggled through it. My first piece of hardware, we have a museum of hardware pieces at CANtrolls, and this thing is, I don't know, the size of an iPhone 10 or whatever, iPhone X, and it
Huge.
has like, yeah, 3 chips on it. Because I knew I had to solder this by hand, and I was no good at soldering, and it's funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
You gotta keep that forever because it's just so funny to see the evolution, right?
we
Like
do. So
physical, yeah.
we have that. So I can tell you the final hardware had 9 revisions.
Hmm.
Um, and the
And
ninth
so
revision,
this was something that you and Yuri kind of decided needed to happen or could facilitate a lot of different things
yeah.
that were his needs as far as engine swaps and wire harnesses, things like that. So like what was that device? So like I know what that device does, but what does that device do?
So the goal of it was that you could engine swap a car. So in Yuri's case, he had the S13 or Nissan 240SX. He had that chassis done. He had the 300ZX done, the older BMWs done, and
When
all
you
the
say
analog
done,
stuff.
when you say done, you mean he had a swap harness for it.
Yeah, at that point, to run a tachometer, you just have to run, some pulsed wires to it, and that's really it.
So
The newer cars,
okay, I got it.
yeah,
Basically, the older cars, you could get the stock gauge cluster to work just by picking up the ignition signal from the ECU.
exactly, or a spark plug or instead of the ECU.
Sure. So he's got it all sorted out as far as analog with the old cars, but the new cars
Yep.
you can't get the gauge cluster to work.
No, and the current solution, at this time there's probably 4 wire harness manufacturer companies, and the other 3 had a solution, and Yuri didn't. And the other three's solution was to run the factory 350Z ECU with its own engine harness and its own sensors. So you basically had 2 complete electrical systems in the car, and only one of them was driving the engine,
Ugh.
right? And it looked awful. When things broke, you didn't know which sensor was the problem. It was just a messy, messy solution. And I think Yuri understood that this was not the way to do it. The CAN bus way was the way to go. So you could take any engine you wanted, use my little box as a signal converter, so it would pick up, the tachometer via pulsed wires and put it out on CAN. And then the 350Z, you'd remove the 350Z computer, and the rest of the chassis wouldn't even notice it because I would be simulating the entire ECU in my little electronics box.
So your little electronics box is not only like a CAN to analog, or excuse me, an analog to CAN converter, but also like it's its own CAN bus output.
Correct. And was able to, do things that we didn't even think were possible. So something like there's a traction control button in the 350Z, and with an older style computer like an LS1, the traction control doesn't really work anymore or never even existed. So we repurposed that button because it was on CAN to override the fans. And we would turn the fans on full speed when that button was pressed.
Hmm.
So it was, call it a turbo timer or something similar.
So I think
So
that maybe we jumped ahead. Give me, to anybody that's listening that really isn't very familiar with CAN, can you just tell us what is CAN and some examples of why it's better? Because it's still like this mysterious thing to, a lot of enthusiasts. Like, a button that you press, you can see it and feel it. You run two wires and, this button is just completing the circuit, right?
hmm
So can you tell us, like, what is CAN and what are its capabilities? So, like, just at an elementary level, break it down.
Sure. Break it down. The whole purpose of CAN was to clean up wiring. Instead of having something like the dashboard is a great example because it has a coolant gauge, a speedometer, a tachometer, has, a million lights on it. In the old school analog cars, you had to have a wire from whatever device going to the instrument cluster to complete that circuit. So you'd have miles of wire just to make the dashboard work. What CAN offers is you can run sensors to the ECU. So you have, what's called a distributed sensor network. So sensors go to the one ECU and all the ECUs talk to each other using two wires. And that way you can have sensors go to the ECU and they go to the dashboard and they go to the ABS unit and the transmission control unit. So instead of running 4 sets of wires, one for each ECU, you run that sensor to one computer and that computer sends it to the rest. So it really just simplifies wiring at its core competency.
So do you think, I mean, it just seems to me so obvious that that's the, the future, and it's just going to be becoming more and more mainstream, which it already, is and has been for a long time. What do you think's holding CAN back from becoming as simple and as comfortable for somebody as wiring in a button? Because like any, Billy Bob at the, circle track can wire a button because he understands, drill a hole, mount a button, run two wires, right? So like, do you think Billy Bob's ever going to be doing, using CAN to activate devices?
I do. It's kind of the goal of my company to get Billy Bob situated with CAN.
So
CAN
it's
has
not
had
it's not weird. Like it's not you don't have to be a computer programmer to use it.
No, not at all. There's devices that claim, CAN compatibility, and it just depends on what their uses are. The goal for at least my company is to, have a module that you don't even need to know about CAN. You don't need to know anything, just hook these two wires up and it'll do the rest of the work for you. And that way it's no different than, plugging in the computer or, putting in a sensor.
And all the programming work is done by you.
Right. People get scared of like a black box mentality, but in this way it helps people. You don't really need to know why it's doing it or what it's doing it. You turn this switch on and this light goes on. That's all you really need.
Mm-hmm.
And the CAN bus is just a way of making it happen.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me ask you this. What about location? So you're in PA right now, yeah?
Correct.
And you were talking about when you went drag racing in your really sweet Nissan Altima. That was at ATCO.
Yep.
So did you grow up in the tri-state area?
Yes. Grew up basically in Philadelphia, suburbs, northeast. Went to school pretty close to home. But as soon as I quit my full-time job and was doing CANtrolls, I was on the road. And I think one of the biggest, or one of the nicest things I did for myself was make CANtrolls portable. And the fact that the last year I spent 38 weeks on the road traveling from project to project to project. And so everything I needed, everything I needed fit in a suitcase. And it was
when you quit your job, you're talking about quitting the drill rig job?
correct. When I transitioned.
Like you're making a good amount of money there or what? Now you don't have to tell me, but
I was, yeah. I
You're pretty-
was making significantly more than my friends, let's put it that way, of the
Okay.
same age.
So you're doing really good. Like, why quit your job and do CANtrolls? Like, do you see that there's an opportunity to make more money, or you're just really interested in it and you know you can make it work? Like, are you like the I wrote down this entire business plan type, or are you like, you know what, I know this, I'm gonna figure it out?
There was a few things that all happened at the same time, which made it nice. One, oil as an industry started falling. This was like that big oil collapse. So we were getting told, prepare for layoffs or whatever that. Two, when they told us that, I started looking for work, and one of the places I almost landed was at Ford. Um, and I had a realization on the flight back from my interview at Ford. I thought if a company this big wants me, then there's something to it. Like they wanted me for my reverse engineering skills and troubleshooting. So
Yeah.
that was a sign that I had something that other people didn't. The fact that they would fly me in I had 3 interviews. So they flew me in for 3 separate interviews, wasted a whole bunch of money putting me in hotels. And I was like, that justifies it for me. And then lastly, my partner and I still had a partner at the time. We agreed that we needed one big project to get me out of full-time work and, carried through CANtrolls. And we got that one project.
Mm.
So all 3 things kind of happened at once. I was
So
layoffs were starting. Go
it
ahead.
wasn't a giant leap.
It wasn't a giant leap, but again, like my parents didn't understand it, for example, right? They're like, "Oh, you're leaving a cushy job with a 401k and insurance. Why would you go and do this with zero benefits and all the risk,
So
to
when
your name?"
when your parents tell you that, do you second guess yourself, or like what's that like? You know, are you like, I got this, or do they have any sway?
No, I'm a pretty independent person.
No, they don't. No.
I definitely listened to them and their concerns, but I
Yeah,
knew if, I was 22 at the time, so if there was a time to take a risk and go bankrupt, it was then.
for sure.
I had zero obligations, no girlfriend, no kids, no pets.
Yeah.
So, I even moved around every single year. So since graduating college, I moved around every single year, chasing opportunities.
Hmm. So my question was going to be, do you think location has had any impact on your success? And it sounds to me like it's not, because you're all over the place.
I am all over the place. The one thing I'll say is that shop again with Mike.
Yeah.
That was close to home, and that started the career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it gave me shop space. I could ask him for the lift, some night if I wanted to test my car or a customer's car.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, no. I mean, I'm used to traveling, and I built up quite a network of shops and customers around the country that I could probably stop in every state and say, "Hey, can I spend the night on your couch?"
That's pretty cool. That's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I like it. I like
Hell
traveling.
yeah. Right on. So I'm gonna get kind of into the nitty gritty. Like, do
Yeah.
you ever? It sounds to me like you know what you're doing, and it's all just like, rainbows and sunshine. But do you ever have those moments? I mean, look, in any technical job, especially something like yours, I feel like there's a lot of times where you got to be pulling your hair out, or you got to be like, what the fuck? Like, how do I don't know how to do this or whatever. Like, what do you do when you're doubting yourself?
So that's a good question. I definitely doubt myself when I get some projects. Um, there's not a lot of resources that I can lean on, right? So a lot of the projects, like you said, I'm doing something for the first time. And so my real only saving grace is, a motto I made for myself is that if the OEM could do it, I can replicate it. Um, and that's really what I've been leaning towards. Um, I think an example would be better with this, but there was a transmission project, and the people who made the transmission, the actual manufacturer of the transmission said this will not run standalone. Like, there's no way you can make it happen. It needs too many signals from the ECU. And uh, at one point, I got it running using that motto, right? It was like a 4-day project with no progress for 3 days. And on the fourth day, it clicked. I said, look,
Mm.
this is what the car does in its driving, you know, in its driving mode. Let's figure out how to make it driving, right? So I literally had it up on jack stands with, all four wheels moving, steering input replicated even like the radio buttons. I didn't know what was the cause of the problem. And so that's really it. That's what I keep telling myself. Any one of my, opponents or they have the same entry to barrier as I do. No one is getting any help from anyone in this industry or in the
Okay, so
CAM.
you're a one-man band, and you don't have like a network of like these are my people, and when I have a problem, I call, Joe Schmo or whatever. Like that's not a thing. Like people, it seems to me that in this industry, and especially kind of at this level, people aren't sharing information. Like, so if you had information on reverse engineering this vehicle, that's yours. Is that how you think of it? And is that kind of how the people in the industry are?
Yes and no. I have people I can call and bounce ideas off of. People I trust, and they trust me with their questions. So I kind of built relationships.
Right.
And so I do use those people. And, I'll send them a CAN log and here's my thoughts. What do you think? I remember one time I thought something was RPM and someone's like, oh no, man, that's torque. Like, look at it. It's still going down when, vehicle speed is going up. I'm like, oh, you're right.
Mm.
So, in terms of a small network, I do have one. And even like with them, I share limited amount of stuff just
Yeah.
because this is the CANtrolls livelihood. And I think
Right. Yeah.
I think it's both ways. So they'll respect my privacy and I'll respect theirs.
Sure. So that kind of leads me into, I'm trying to talk to you about, when you kind of are upside down or in the middle of a project and maybe you can't see a way out or something. It sounds to me like you always just have this, like you said, your motto, which is like, I'm going to figure it out, basically. But do you ever, like, when you get to that situation, like you said, you overcome it with your motto and kind of that work ethic that you have. So has there ever been a time that you haven't been able to overcome? Like, what's the worst experience that you had in business, and what kind of take us through it? Like, was there ever a situation where you like actually couldn't figure the problem out and you had to tuck your tail and be like, I don't know? Or
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
So it was the same reason that I left my full-time job. It was that one project that we got, that could keep me afloat. It was going great. The money was there, the quantities were there. We spent, 4 or 5 weeks of dedicated development time with this one customer, and then just no responses. They ghosted me. And, bills were piling up. We already sent out for, 100-unit production run. So I was on my credit card was going to be due in 30 days. I had no job, no money, rent was due,
So
production.
they contracted you, like, just kind of a verbal thing, like, hey, we need this done, and you got started, and you said the money was in. They were paying for a couple of months, or
They were paying. The way we set it up, because it was such a big project, was per phase completion. So we got through 2 of the 3 phases, where the
and they're
first one,
and they're paying on time, and everything seems
yeah,
kosher.
yep. So, proof of concept I did out of pocket, then they paid me for it. The second phase was to go visit them. It was a real shop with real cars, all that. It was, again, I spent 4 weeks with them doing development work. And then it was at the point of the project where I was like, all right, I have everything I need. I'm gonna go home, make hardware, put it into production, and, just I'll bill you for it. Because we had no problem with money before them, and they
Yeah.
were very quick to respond. And literally overnight, that changed.
So
So,
at this point, have you ever figured out what happened?
yeah, I know now.
Okay.
I probably will not share it here, but I do know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, what can you do, right? You're at the bottom of the bottom, bills stacking up, and you got to move forward, right? So, um, I just pushed forward. I made a pledge to myself to reach out to one new person every day. I was asking old customers like, "Hey, I have a few ideas. Any of this interest you?" kind of stuff. And I was taking jobs I shouldn't have, but got to make ends meet.
Yeah. So at that point, though, you're not beating yourself up. Like you're not, you know,
Oh,
coming.
yeah, I changed the way I did business.
Yeah.
Definitely. So that's where like being an engineer hurts you as a business, and I don't think a lot of people recognize that. Like when you're trained as an engineer, you're like gung ho on, finding the technical solution, and you got to have someone to hold you back and be like, whoa, 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 like, are you sure about this? Does this make business sense? And
Right.
I was still 23, 24 at this time, so
Trial by fire, man. This is what,
yep,
that's what it's all about. Like you got to go through that so that you know how to deal with it moving forward.
yep, I can tell you it will not happen again.
I hope it doesn't. At least it won't happen exactly that way again.
Yep. But yeah, it was pretty bad. I didn't know what to do at that point. I was almost ready to ask my parents for money, move back home, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But you just like you said, you just contacted one previous customer per day and then just kind of took some
Well,
drudge work if
yeah,
you had
it
to.
was mostly new customers. So
Oh, okay.
I went online, I read articles or journals every day, and I'm like, you know, I'm so and so, this is my company, this is what I do. Is there anything I can interest you in?
So
And
you would send an email to a random person?
yeah, basically like cold calling, but cold emailing. I'd
Le-
follow up with a call.
Legit.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do, right? It sounds a little bit funny now, but that was literally my life was where do I find money?
Yeah. But I mean, the difference is that you had the skill set to back it up. So you like actually have a marketable skill set as opposed to, you know, hey man, I could turn wrenches for you. Like you had a really unique skill set and you were good at it. So, you know,
Yep.
yeah.
I mean, we even took projects. I remember at that point, we took projects that were not CAN based. We were just, electronic manufacturers at that point, or
Hmm,
solution providers is the way I put it.
sure. And what were these in automotive or no?
Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them were in the old company, the drill rig company I worked for. They asked me for these quick little knickknacks, which I was happy to make. Other stuff was automotive.
Yeah. So, Vadim, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal? Where do you want to be?
I do want to move into new industries. As awesome as the automotive aftermarket is, um, I don't think it's quite there yet with all the CAN stuff where it should be. So while I'm pushing on that, I want to go to more trade shows that are like trade shows. So like breaking into, medical or construction or industrial sectors. Like
Hmm.
the factory automation stuff, manufacturing is coming back to US. So, they all use CAN or they use some other communication protocol in electronics. Everything is, electric now.
But isn't it kind of monotonous? Like, what about that gets you going? Like what's new? What would be new about that?
New about that is there's new challenges. There's every project presents itself in a different way. And, just again, from an engineering perspective, having, being a problem solver is a good feeling, I guess. It's a pretty
Okay,
selfish thing, I guess.
got it. No, that's actually what I was trying to get to. Is I'm always trying to figure out like what gets what makes you tick. So being a problem solver, that's what makes you tick. Because I that's what I think makes you tick. Yeah.
It sounds cliche, right? But like if you find what you're good at, the money will come, right? So like I think the saying is do what you love and the money will come. That is completely true. You might struggle for 3 to 6 months, but if you put in the work, you do the time, things will work out, and not enough people hear that.
We're working on something, you and and
Yep.
I originally contacted you, and then just kind of as a feeler, and then a few months later, all of a sudden you followed up, and I
Yeah.
think the huge difference between most businesses and you, because it both tells me like, you're interested in my business, and at the same time that you're a go-getter. And I feel like that's so. And go-getter to me means, hey, we're going to start this project. He's going to be able to actually get it done, because everybody talks the talk. That right there is a marriage of kind of these two things, like your technical side and your kind of business go get it thing. And a lot of times people just have the technical side and they don't have that. They don't have that go get it, ambition. But I'd really admire that about you for sure.
We've spoken about this too, but like whenever two people talk, both people have to have like skin in the game.
Totally.
Like, and between communication and being professional, I think from the time I spent in like corporate life with the drill rigs and the medical devices, you know, emails and follow-ups, that was just a standard thing that you did as an employee. So if I can carry that over into the company, why not, right?
Well, I'll tell you that it's the exception and it's not the rule, because, yeah, a lot of times you gotta do other people's job for them, and it gets really frustrating.
And that's really where, I'm glad to say that we're at the point where we can start saying no to projects. And like that's an instant, I would call it a turn off for me. Right? If you came to me and wanted a product and I had to chase you for the details, then clearly one of us isn't ready to proceed.
Yeah.
Right? So how can you expect me to drop everything I'm doing and serve you when, you're not even trying to get out of your own way?
Exactly. So basically, like if I came to you with a product idea or a project that I needed and I didn't have my ducks in a row, like that's not a project that you can do, because I didn't like, I came to you with like a fledgling idea and that's not ready for you yet.
Yep. I mean, look, if we talk about that without saying the specifics, you came to me with an idea. We spoke on the phone. I think it was like 2 hours the first time, for real. And then the first thing I sent you back was a scope of work. This is what I understood. This is what you've asked me for. Is this correct? Right? And that's what our whole basis of, the relationship has been.
Yeah. And then I think I sent back to you something the next day that was, I don't know, 3 pages or something.
Yeah.
Detailed.
You had comments based on my comments. So I was like, this guy's legit.
Got you fooled.
Now I know. But
so, like, I think we talked about the majority of the things that we do that we normally talk about on these podcasts. It's been a while. I'm a little rusty, knocking the rust off. On Do It for a Living, I like to give somebody and everybody listening kind of an action item. So it's not just this passive listening thing, but something that they can actively go out and do to better their situation, right? So don't just listen to this and be like, cool, hey, I've done my thing, but like pick up the phone, make an email, email somebody, do something. So what is that action item for our listeners that's coming from you? What should they do?
So I am a big supporter of continuous improvement or education. And I didn't realize
Kaizen.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was the actual like meaning behind your company, but and it doesn't have to be high school, it doesn't have to be college. It's something as easy as, instead of watching cat videos or burnout compilations, challenge yourself to learn something every night before you go to sleep. Like go on YouTube and type in, why are trees brown or why is bark brown? It doesn't even have to be related to cars, doesn't have to be related to anything. If it made you stop and think during the day, you should know the answer to it.
Boom.
Even if you like forget it.
If it made you stop and think during the day, you should know the answer to it. So just carve out a little bit of burnout competition BS time and like go learn something.
Yeah, right. I mean, with the whole, world at your fingertips with, the phones and computers.
It does seem like kind of a waste just to watch garbage videos, doesn't it?
It does, right? So I try to stay away from that kind of stuff and, teach myself something every night, whether it's music, whether it's art or, cars or, electronics.
Solid.
That's my goal.
learn something every night.
Yep.
Yep. So I'm going to get into quick answer questions. I'm just going to rattle these things off. Hopefully we don't dwell on them too long. Is that good?
Yep, that works.
So tell us about a game-changing product that you've seen in the last year.
All right. So I think this was mentioned before on the podcast, but I'm going to bring it back with electric superchargers and turbos.
Yeah. So that's already out there in high-level motorsport. I just wonder how long it's going to take for it to trickle down.
I predict.
Do you think it's going to be like affordable for like normal human beings, not race teams?
Yes, I know it's coming with commercial trucking. The big diesels, the 18-liter diesel engines, they will be the first ones that can get electric turbos because one, they can afford it because those things are expensive, and two, they need it the most because they have awful throttle response.
Okay, what software program are you using daily?
So most of the business stuff, I use G Suite or Gmail, Google Drive. For software development, I use Visual Studios, and for PCB and electronics, I use KiCad or KiCad. I don't know how to pronounce it.
What about an app? Is there anything that's on your phone that's particularly useful?
Yeah. Over the years, I've gotten better at this, but I have a hex to decimal to binary converter. I can basically do it in my head, but not detailed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I use that because obviously CAN is in hex and people know everything in decimal.
What's the app?
It's called DevCalc.
DevCalc?
Yep, DevCalc. One word.
And that's not just it's just a better format than like your regular calculator, because doesn't your regular calculator have a hex converter?
On the computer, but not on an iPhone. At least I don't know about Android. I refuse to use them.
Yes. Oh man, I'm the only one here at the shop with an iPhone. Everyone else is an Android.
Look where you are.
What about your favorite shop tool? Or whatever you got, whatever kind of tool.
Yep. So for car hacking, I would definitely suggest a very good scanner, like an Autel or a Snap-on scanner, and something in the thousands of dollars range, not in the hundreds.
What do you use?
I use an Autel. I forget the number, but some form of Bluetooth one. AUTEL.
Mm-hmm. Now, I hope you're going to say what I want you to say. But what's the future of automotive performance?
I definitely believe in electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Yep.
When?
When?
Yeah. Like when is gas going to be outlawed?
Well, it's starting to in Europe.
In California as well.
In California, where I was just from. I would say electric vehicle performance is coming relatively quickly. As soon as it happened with fuel injection. As soon as people figure out how to make them run standalone without, basically a hot rod setup, that's when the big boom is going to come, because Tesla and Nissan, they've done the job of making batteries and motors widely available. So prices are coming down. There's more and more crash chassis. Now it's up to people like me to make it all work.
Are you guys working on any like electric vehicle swaps? I feel like that'd be a wiring specialties alley.
Not with wiring specialties, but there are 3 open projects for electric vehicles, and actually what I was in California for was a year-long contract for an electric vehicle.
Yeah. We didn't get into that, and we're running out of time, so we can't, but sorry guys. Next time. How do we connect with you and your company? How do we get a hold of Vadim? How do we get a hold of CANtrolls?
So you can follow CANtrolls on Instagram, or you can email me at vadim@cantrolls.com, or if that's too hard to spell, then info@cantrolls.com.
And anything that you email's best. Anything that you buy from CANtrolls, you get a really sweet sticker. I got a sweet sticker on my engineering office door. I like it.
Yeah.
World domination, one sticker at a time.
Controlling the universe. That's the motto.
Right on, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking some time out. I've wanted to kind of grill you for a little while, so I'm glad I got to. And if anybody that's listening, wants to know the truth, this guy is the truth. Anyways, thanks a lot, man. It's been good talking to you.
Thanks, Reed. I really appreciate it as well. It was fun.
Talk to you soon, brother.
All right. See ya.